I now come to the last part of the story. Madan Lal Pahwa, the person who threw a bomb on Gandhi's prayer meeting on 25 January, was immediately caught, and that didn't help. The police moved so slowly that Gandhi could be assassinated by his associates on the 30th of January. He gave him 5 days life, extra life, because he failed. This Madan Lal Pahwa, I and a friend of mine interviewed him because he was a refugee coming from West Pakistan, and I'm studying the genocide of the time at the moment. For the last many years I'm doing that, and we interviewed him as a victim of partition. And it is in that context that I would like to spend 2-3 minutes before I finally end up with what I have to say. Madan Lal Pahwa, I won't go into the details of his life. He was born in a small half village, half town, you can call it a village, called Pakpatan in district Montgomery, West Punjab, and was uprooted, saw some of the violence. 1 or 2 members of his family was killed in the violence, and then he came to Delhi and seething with anger and began to take revenge against Muslims. Not in Delhi or in Punjab where the battle was, but he goes down south to places like Hyderabad and Bombay and 1 or 2 other small cities of Maharashtra, and begins to take revenge on the Muslims there who have nothing to do with this carnage here, northern India. And he is very open about it. He spouts Hindu nationalist rhetoric at every opportunity, I found. And gradually it emerged. Even his language began to change. He began to speak in a kind of a, first Hindustani, then there was slippage into Urdu, and occasionally down or clear-cut Urdu. Now it transpired that he said that the best part of his life for the life in Pakpatan, in West Montgomery, from where he was exiled. And he talked so movingly about it. Pakpatan has also the mazar of the famous Sufi mystic Baba Farid. That mazar was the center of his life, early life. He used to go there as a child. He began talking about how every year there used to be a fair around that mazar, and how everybody participated in that fair, and famous qawwals came from all over the place to sing at that religious shrine. And he even told us some of the couplets that were he still remembered. It was absolutely moving. The rhetoric of Hindu nationalism has already slipped out. So the second part of the interviews were after I had done the 2 others were done by Rajni Bakshi. So she asked him, how do you reconcile this with your earlier life? You know, this other, what you have said. And then he says, actually, what he says in response to that is also fascinating, because it seems that, the Muslims, they were wonderful people, that they were very friendly, and he was, and only some conspiratorial political functionaries within them led them astray. The whole thing has been changing. I mean, they were led astray. We didn't tally with what he had been doing, and so on and so forth. Now, the point I'm trying to make, I will now, she has given me 5 minutes, so I will be very specific and to the point. One, that this rhetoric of Hindu nationalism is ultimately the theory of state, which was common currency, and the popular vision of the state globally was the one which was internalized and enshrined directly in Hindu nationalism. It is not an aberration. Hindu nationalism is a distorted form of the theory of the state, which mechanically and logically, on the basis of history, embraces that theory and is willing to face its full implications. 2. Nationalism is not the same as territoriality, which is a species characteristics. Even cats and dogs have territoriality, and even birds have territoriality. So it is not confined to the human species. But territoriality is a state of mind. Human beings have territoriality. It has nothing to do with nationalism as contemporary world has defined it, because nationalism is not a state of mind, it is an ideology. It has clear-cut implications of which go only with ideology. And I look at ideology psychologically. To me, ideology also involves certain things logically and almost, I would say, unavoidable. Nationalism, an ideology invariably implies a deep ambivalence towards the targeted beneficiaries of the ideology. All ideologies. I have not seen an exception to this till now. I would like to find out if you can think of any exceptions. So I have come to the conclusion, after something like engagement of some last 15-20 years with ideology, that the feminists do not like women, the Marxists do not like the proletariat, the nationalists do not like their people, because there is always this underlying discomfort. There is always this statement that they are not living up to their responsibility as a defender of that ideology. That the proletariat are not revolutionary enough, not radical enough. They are always willing to make compromises, always willing to run away from the responsibility of implementing the ideology, even though it is to their benefit. There is always a vanguard, you can call it the expertise, a sector of expertise in all ideology. It is also in the Marx, you see it in Marxism, you see it in feminism, you see it, in Marxism, you see it even in psychoanalysis. Once it becomes, anything which becomes ideologized has these implications. That's my general theory of ideology. That's the third. And in this context, as a correlate of it, I wanted to spend a little bit more time, but doesn't matter. I can start off, state my position straight away. That secularism enters as a responsibility to accept and in fact push the desacralization that has come in. All round desacralization. The process of secularization, which was so anxiety provoking to the European mind, was handled to the concept of secularism, the ideology of secularism, not secularization as a process, ideology of secularism, as a means of containing that anxiety, centering around, all around desacralization or desanctification or demystification. You will find that secularists will always be particularly hostile to interventions. I think that's probably a better way to put it, of political interventions which seem to tap public consciousness through the use of extra-secular categories, because they're always afraid of the fragile base of secularism, because it is ideology. Because ideology is skin deep, it flourishes in places where faiths are already wobbly to some extent. Where it is not, it is a real danger. That's why Savarkar never got any, he was totally rejected by the Hindu society. And even BJP's, if you look at the data, empirical data, only 10% of BJP's supporters vote them on ideological grounds.
Thank you. Thank you very much.